Hi folks, welcome to the first mini lecture on reproductive systems. The function of our reproductive systems, I guess it's fairly obvious, it's to reproduce. Technically that's called producing offspring. And it's important to remember that although a boy and a girl might have intercourse and produce a viable pregnancy, the reproductive systems don't begin to function fully until puberty is complete. The functions of the reproductive organs are by and large the same in males and females. And here's what I mean by that. In both males and females, the reproductive organs produce what are called gametes, eggs or sperm. And in both cases, the reproductive organs shepherd those gametes and care for them. It's also the case that the endocrine glands of the reproductive system produce sex hormones in males and females. More about that later. Where the two systems differ is that the external genitals of males are specialized for delivery of sperm to females, and the internal genitalia of females is specialized for accommodating the penis as well as shepherding the development of the fetus. So before we really jump into the anatomy of the reproductive systems, a little bit about genetics, a very little bit. So you guys have already learned that chromosomes are made of DNA, which is a nucleic acid that's wrapped around these spool-like proteins. And right before the cell divides, you get the sort of characteristic chromosome shape that's shown in this image. Our chromosomes are numbered from 1 to 22 based on essentially based on size, and then and those are called autosomes. And the final pair is the final pair of chromosomes, which is either usually an X and a Y or two X's in most cases. Those are the sex chromosomes. We have two sets of chromosomes because we're part of a sexually reproducing species. And that means you get one set of chromosomes from each of your parents. Biologists describe that situation by saying that adult humans are diploid. Di means two and ploid means number. So that also explains why this is sometimes referred to as 2N, and meaning the number of copies of the chromosomes. There are two kinds of cell division that occur. Almost all of the cell division in our bodies uses a process called mitosis. And this process is used for all growth, all development, any kind of injury repair. And the point of this kind of cell division is to produce genetically identical cells. Another way of describing that is to say that the cells are clones. Sometimes these are called daughter cells. These genetically identical cells are referred to as clones. And in order to create clones, what you have to do is, the first thing you have to do is copy the DNA. So you have in this first panel 2 chromosomes, one from each parent. Then you have the DNA of each parent is copied, and this is still considered to be 2 copies because one from each parent, because the 2 copies from mom and the 2 copies from dad are still stuck together. And so geneticists consider it to be a single chromosome, even though there are 4 copies of the genetic material. So the next thing that happens is that the chromosomes line up along the midline of the cell, and they cytoskeletal proteins attach to the outside of each chromosome, and they pull the 2 sets of chromosome apart into what will become 2 different cells. And then finally, the cell itself, the larger cell itself, splits apart along what's called a cleavage plane. So you start diploid, you stay diploid, right? You always are considered to be 2N. The other kind of cell division is only occurs in the testes. It's called meiosis, and it's all about making gametes, eggs and sperm. And the reason that you need a different process of cell division, what's often referred to as reduction division, the reason that you need reduction division is because if you didn't reduce the number of copies of the genetic material when you were making eggs and sperm during fertilization, which requires an egg and a sperm, you would suddenly double the genetic material. And so every generation you would have doubling of the genetic material, and fairly soon there would be nothing left, no space left in the cell for anything but DNA. So this process, meiosis, involves cutting the number of chromosomes from 46 in humans to 23. So we go from being sperm and eggs go from being 2N or diploid to being 1N or haploid. This process only takes place in the ovaries and the testes in very specific precursor cell populations. And one of the additional ways in which meiosis is quite different than mitosis, in addition to there being half the number of chromosomes with meiosis, is that every single set of chromosomes that ends up in an egg or a sperm is different from any other one that's ever existed. And that's why you end up with genetically different or genetically unique individuals in sexually reproducing species. So This is an animated comparison between mitosis and meiosis, which unfortunately won't show up using this software. But essentially, it just shows you that you have exactly the same thing. I don't have purple, so I can't make it purple. Whereas with meiosis, you have 2 rounds of cell division. And then another round, which is going to give you, if we're talking about males, and I'm going to do males because eggs look a lot like regular old cells. They're just larger. Right, so you have 4 genetically unique sperm. So here we've got you going from diploid to haploid when you get to the gametes, and here, it's diploid to diploid. The panel over all the way on the right is essentially asking you to think about if you're looking at an image of cell division, what are the clues that will help you figure out if it's mitosis or meiosis that you're looking at? So think about that for a second. Are you thinking? I can hear you thinking. All right, so on the right, what we see is you've got a diploid cell, and there are 2 chromosomes in this cell. So 1 set of chromosomes. And then before the cell divides, you still are at 2N, right? You still just have 2 copies because they're connected, but you've copied all of the DNA. During the process of cell division on the right, you end up at the end of the process with 2 cells, each of which is genetically identical to the parent cell. Right? And contrast that with the panel on the left in the same image. Again, you've copied the DNA to start with, right? So you're diploid. But then you have a round of cell division so that you're at 1N, and each of them is genetically different from the other. fertilization is the process that returns the chromosome number to diploid. So again, in humans, that is 46, 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. So you have 1N, which in humans is 23, 1N, which in humans is 23, and then you have fertilization, which is fusion of the 2 gametes, and you end up with 2N, which is 46. Okay, so fruit flies, everyone's favorite. Fruit flies are also sexually reproducing animals. And you might say, why the heck are you showing us fruit flies, Cindy? The answer is there are 2 things we want you guys to take away from this lecture. One has to do with how many chromosomes do humans have, period. How many autosomes, how many sex chromosomes, how many pairs, what's the total number. But we also want you to understand what happens during mitosis and meiosis in terms of the number of chromosomes, meaning the business about being haploid or diploid. And to actually get at that question, I need to know that you didn't just memorize how many chromosomes there are, right? So that's why we're talking about fruit flies. So here are some very cute fruit fly chromosomes. They have 4 pairs. The little teeny tiny one here is also a pair. Let's see. Okay. So fruit fly skin cells, what they have, we're just going to call it skin. So if their skin cells have 8 chromosomes, how many chromosomes would you have in the wing cell? In a wing cell. So think about what you've learned so far, right? What process is responsible for all growth and development and injury repair? Mitosis. And mitosis takes an animal that's 2N, or not an animal, a cell that's 2N, and creates another 2N cell. Skin cells are body cells, and so are wing cells. And remember, the only place that you have meiosis, or reduction division, is in the gonads, testes and ovaries. So if you have 8 chromosomes in a skin cell, then you're going to have 8 chromosomes in a wing cell. Another way of asking a similar question, at the end of mitosis, how many chromosomes does each fruit fly daughter cell have? And the answer is 8. Because 2N is 8 if you're a fruit fly. At the end of meiosis, how many chromosomes does a daughter cell have? And the answer there is 4. Because the gametes are 1N in sexually reproducing species. So to summarize, the human life cycle, which is what we call this whole business, right? You thought maybe it was just growing up and having babies, but no, it's a life cycle, and it involves fertilization, which is what creates a zygote. A zygote is a fertilized egg. She can't spell. So eggs and sperm are each 1N. You put them back together and you're at 2N. And from fertilization on until puberty and until you're in the gonads, which are the testes and the ovaries, everything is mitosis, all growth and development. Meiosis occurs in the ovary and the testis, and that takes you from 2N to 1N.